Joel Havenstein from Tierfund, a resilience advisor, and I'd say I enjoyed the game tremendously when I played it in Dhaka. Disagree, it's totally something I'd play at the pub, but then I'm a game geek, so there you are. But it does seem to me that it presupposes that the main barrier to flexible decision making is around people's mindset about the future. And what you found, and I think maybe the report could say this even more clearly than it does, is that the barriers to flexibility have much more to do with institutions and entitlements, to look at the other bit of your adaptive capacity framework. I wonder, you're playing this at the local level with people who, though they have wiggle room, it is limited. You say in the Ethiopia report, people tried even within that strongly centralized system to try to find room, and they found something, but they quickly got to the limits of it, and you can't do more unless, it says in the report, the buy-in from above is guaranteed. Guaranteed, by the way, I think is one of the words like ensure that we use all the time and ought to just banish from our vocabulary. But have you looked at playing this game at higher levels where there's the decision-making capacity currently, and whether that frees people up at all to send resources more down to the local level, and to talk about what focus on the barriers and how we get past those as a power analysis thing?
Lindsay, do you want to go on while the microphone travels?
Okay, yeah, just to, I guess, quickly point, I think that definitely, a very valid point. And, I mean, essentially, if you did want to bring about real change, the process through doing it, if you're going to use a game, would be happening at the national level, because these are the places where those structures are set. I think what we recognized was, we tried to identify where we had that value added. We recognized that if we did focus at that national level, it's going to take a lot longer than the resources and the time that we had available. We recognized that there are things that can happen at the local level, that we can work within that wriggle room to try and influence, at the same time as also trying to lobby at the national level. When we had these workshops, we tried to bring in people from central government in each of those cases, people that we identified as agents of change. The extent to which that was successful, I'm not sure yet, because most of our analysis was mostly at the local level. But the next stage, if you actually want to deliver that change, would probably be to do it at higher levels. I guess the main thing to point out here really is, though, that again, the game really is not that tool to bring that change. It's the tool that opens the door in realizing that there's a problem, whether that's at the local level or at the national level. What happens after that is much more important. So making sure that the new structures that you put in place are actually better than the old ones. What are the safeguards that you've got? There's no point in transforming for transformation's sake. So we have to be very careful about how we bring about that change at that national level. Those structures are very important, and we don't want to change something overnight without making sure that those processes are actually the right ones that are put in place.
But if that's true, then actually that strengthens the case. If that's true, that actually strengthens the case for doing it at a national level, right? Because you're trying to prize open space to do the institutional reforms.
Yeah.
Okay.
No, I'm not saying in any way that they shouldn't be done at the national level. Very much so. I'm just trying to explain why, for now, the focus with the time and the resources that we had, we felt our value added was at that local level.
I think it's absolutely worth experimenting with at the local level, and the results are really interesting. But I think the results might point us to
very much so.
It's got to.
And the other point, just to quickly make, is that we weren't sure yet whether FFDM is at all relevant to people, and the best place to start that is at the local level rather than at the national level. So if we identified that actually it didn't make any sense to people down at the local level, then starting at the national level would have been very bad, because we would have been incentivizing things that make no sense or are not relevant to local level decision makers, where the actual change is happening.
Yeah, if I could just add to that as well, I think the game, we're very keen as a staff team to see the game as one tool. I mean, for us, it was a really nice participatory handshake between decision makers, and the country teams made sure that national officials were part of the game in each place that we played it, and that really just helped to either as a handshake between the officials, and the national officials could see the limitations and the difficulties, and we're making much more closer connections as human beings as well as kind of colleagues, but also the game is like a nice tool of many that we use in the programme more widely, and everything we do is exactly, you're bang on the money basically, Joel. It is that interconnection between those decision makers and us facilitating that being stronger and much more effective. which again links into Duncan's work on effective states and active citizens. So it's absolutely fundamental. And with a lot of our officials, I'm thinking about the Office of the Prime Minister, they were there. Actually, they did do a little bit more than they had previously after being in Katido with the district planners, experiencing a lot more. And the Ministry of Local Government, who also had a presence there, they actually were quite horrified by the levels of capacity in the district, and they actually themselves rolled out intensive training on using current planning methodologies with much more direct support from the National Planning Department in the Ministry of Local Government, and they did it in that district, and they rolled it across out across the whole of the greater north of Uganda. So that kind of scale-up idea is very much kind of what we're trying to do, and the more of it we can all do, the better, I think.
Thank you.
Hope it works. Yeah. Hi, I'm Agnes with Care International. Thanks for your presentations. The video and the research findings from the Accra research in the 3-country talked a lot about whether and how FFDM is a useful concept and whether playing games is the right approach. But I'd be really interested in hearing a little bit more about the utility of FFDM and its principles and what they are in relation to dealing with the uncertainty of climate change and the possibility or potential of maladaptation and avoiding that. So what did you learn? What did people say about the utility of playing these games and making flexible and forward-looking decisions, for example, when it comes to trade-offs in resource allocation, etc., making decisions on crop farming, looking far ahead into the future? Because these are the recurrent challenges we're facing and the recurrent kind of barriers that we're facing with people locally, is that actually forward-looking decision-making is often quite impossible when it comes to finding the resources and the headspace for it, really. Yeah, thanks.
Thank you.
Yeah,
Do you want to?
There's another question. Take a few questions.
Yeah.
It takes so long.
If they go all towards FFDM and its utility, go please.
My name is Rosemary Olive Bonenier. I come from Cameroon but based in Tanzania. I work with the Global Eco-Village Network Africa and the Women Environment and Climate Action Network. I'm a geologist and gender ambassador. Thank you very much. I came a bit late because I was coming all the way from Luton. My reaction here is, when I look at what you have done, it's from the British angle, I would say. But I just try to find out whether you had compared with what other things have been done, say, by the Americans or by the Germans, because what I have experienced over the years is this donor fatigue where each, it's the same Uganda, it's the same Mozambique, it's the same wherever Ethiopia, whether you try to compare what other groups have done, maybe the USAID or the Germans or whoever have done, and on the same climate change, and whether you can learn something and exchange from that. Thank you.
Thank you. We've got one question here in front.
I'm Martin Rokitsky from Oxfam GB. While I don't want to underestimate the value of changing attitudes, but I want to come back to one of the straitjackets in that particularly local level planning and decision making is facing, which is the budgeting processes, resource allocation frameworks and process in countries. Did you, while I understand that there wasn't the focus, but obviously planning and providing the money to put it to implement whatever is planned for is the vital step. Did you get any? Do you see any positive signs that there is more flexibility, there is more willingness towards contingency lines? While I do agree that donors, and I worked for a donor, are people and they're willing to make change. However, I think still if this is not correct, if there's no more contingency, more flexibility in the, then there might be limited chances for implementation.
Thank you. Lindsay, you want to take them up?
Yeah. Maybe I'll start with this issue of donor
Lindsay,
fatigue.
can you take your mic?
The donor fatigue, trying to look at what other people are doing as well. I think perhaps on the outside, yes, it does come across as perhaps a British approach, seeing as many of the NGOs and ourselves are based here. But I think we'd be in a sense horrified to think that that's where the priorities are coming from. We've spent 4 years in country with a very national and local-led in what we would like to imagine is a relatively bottom-up process in identifying what the problems are. The sort of the frameworks that we've been using aren't ones that we've been imposing on. Again, this is why something like a games approach is very useful, in that we don't try and promote a kind of a top-down model and saying, this is what we think is the most important thing that you should be focusing on, and this is exactly how you're going to do it. A game allows people to recognize what some of the complex issues are, try to identify that there is a problem, if there is one, and for them to be able to themselves identify ways forward in trying to change that process. And again, I think that's one of the strongest things from using a games approach that can help. It doesn't come across as that top-down, one-way, we come in, we intervene, we do a presentation, people go away now informed and their capacity has been enhanced. It's very much the opposite of that. We are very much, drawing on what other people are doing as well, and these game styles of approaches are ones that many people are doing. It's not just us. People like the World Food Programme, USA, they all use these. In the context of adaptation, it's mainly through the Red Cross, who have many different partnerships. The World Bank as well is actually rolling these out in a number of East African countries at the moment. So it's very much an approach that is not one approach. We're trying to draw as much as we can from the learnings from others as well. On the budgeting processes, I think that's in a sense one of the biggest issues here, because as we mentioned before, if you can't change those national structures, then in a sense all we're trying to do is play within that wiggle room. And if we are to actually scale this up and have real impact, we're going to have to take more of a focus on that central style of planning and the structures in there, see if we can change those. That's a whole different kettle of fish. It's much harder to try and influence those actors, those stakeholders. You need a pretty good, again, political economy analysis to identify who those actors, who the key agents of change are, to be able to do that. We have tried, and as Saskia sort of pointed out, we've been working with them to work within the confines that they have, and also bring in at the national level the people responsible for setting local guidelines. So people within the ministries of local government have been taking part. And so they're, in a sense, starting that journey of realizing that there's a problem. And actually in Cortido, they realized that the way that they were doing their district planning was completely wrong. And they had to completely redo the district development planning off the back of having run this game, realizing that something was wrong, and have now tried to incorporate some of the elements of this flexible and forward-looking approach within their new development plan. Still within the confines of what national government has set, but working within that process and incorporating the views from that national level. So, agree. We're not trying at this stage to completely transform anything. I don't think we have to be realistic in the saying that we can't. But the next stage would definitely be trying to influence those real solid structures that are the key barriers to delivering this kind of change.
Just to add on that, it's a really good question, and it's something we're going to look at much more purposefully in the next part of Accra. But with that case, we are hopeful that better district development plan will lead the local government in Cortido to receive a lot more money from domestic revenues, and that's exactly what happened in a case that we worked on previously in Bundi Bujo, and we're still connected with that process, which is another district in the western part of Uganda. The work that we did with them there and supporting them delivering a better district development plan meant that they got about £33,000 more than they would have done normally, because their development plan was scored higher in the national system. So that was very much trying to increase the effectiveness of that state as a whole, of that system as a whole, to move and ensure that finance flows more effectively within itself. So that wasn't donor money coming in or anything like that. It's the government of Uganda saying, this is good, we can see development happening, better outcomes for people, you can have more money to do more of it. So we want to kind of really explore that. And we've worked on the NAPA, the National Adaptation Plans of Action, and the global financing as well, to see how that can flow better to communities.
Shall I quickly try and say something on the usefulness and the utility? I think we did see quite a lot of usefulness, not of the concept of FFDM as such. That is just the wording of it. But the way we approached it through the game, and particularly through those reflection sessions where people start reflecting on what the game experiences might mean for their everyday planning or just everyday implementation life where they are stuck in, I think was extremely important to see where are those trade-offs. And of course what the people experienced in the game is not a clear or not an exact picture of reality, not at all. This was just a kind of an experience. And then the important bit of those Accra workshops, and that's why they went over 2 days, was to kind of say, okay, in the game, I have done this, and that was the consequence. Now, in the real life, I'm working in the agricultural sector. I'm doing these and those decisions. I have that amount of funding. I have that amount of staffing. I have those capacities. And how do I now kind of take the learning and the experiences and from the game and apply that to my daily, everyday, day in, day out life? And that is the main point of where that workshop or reflection enabled game was important, not the game as such, not the kind of the messages, but the messages were important. The embedded messages were the main important bit of it. How you could be a bit more flexible, how you could use that wiggle room, what you could gain by collaborating with other sectors and making a little bit of, kind of sort of synergistic gains out of working with others, the value of contingency, where we have seen that, for example, in Ethiopia, people started to think, well, maybe we should really plan ahead, because droughts have happened in this area so many times. We kind of know that people will be affected, that there will be food shortages for some. Why not do we start building it into our plans, into our 5-year plans, instead of waiting and then going from one NGO, knocking at doors, asking for money to support people. So, these kind of learnings have happened and have been taken up. So I think as a tool, it has shown its potential. It definitely needs to be further refined. It definitely needs to be further refined when it's going to be used, for example, at national level, because questions will be different. But I think as a tool, it has shown that it can open up space for discussion, for exchange, for learning, and for hopefully action.
And I think on that point as well, what I loved about the research was this idea of wiggle room, and how there's a really nice diagram that the team who are looking at complexity produced, and it was the idea that you have the existing ways of working here, the kind of, you people, we have no money, our vehicle is broken, national teams just tell us what to do, these people, they don't know what they want, all these kind of stock answers that you get in every sector when you talk to local government. So those are the existing kind of ways of working, and then you have transformative change over here, and actually it's exploring the wiggle room and getting those existing ways of working to kind of expand and shift a bit that is the precursor to more transformative change. That the two are so far removed, we've got to just help shift this a bit to start moving towards transformational change. How we get to that, I don't know, and that's why we're pitching to kind of do more collective work amongst us. I think as a development sector, we have to transform our own ways of working. How we're doing it now is not working. Running around, elbowing each other in the face for bits of money from DFID or Rockefeller or whatever, ain't working. We have to set our own agenda, our own priorities, understand the needs of our communities more first, work more collectively to try and find the answer to these questions, and then look for the funding. How we're doing it now isn't working. So if you're interested in that, I definitely encourage you to come and have a glass of wine.
Was that the key word? In kind of looking at the alarm clock here in front of me, it might have just been that key word. Thank you very much for coming, and for excuse for the short time of discussion, but please take the opportunity, stick around, have a glass of juice or wine, and engage further on in that discussion with Accra team members, with scientists, with, policymakers as well, yes, we have here, to kind of explore those ways of bringing together different sets of information and knowledge which is required for making change. Thank you very much, and have a safe journey home.